Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Chronicle TV. Today, we are going to take you to Italy and to speak to three impressive young intellectuals and activists who have been advocating the Palestinian cause in Italy. The idea behind this special episode is that while Palestinians are pushing for a unified political discourse at home, the Palestinian solidarity movement around the world also needs to unify its advocacy discourse abroad in order for us to unify our ranks and push for a specific political agenda ultimately aimed at putting enough pressure on world governments, multinational corporations, and work within civil society in order for us to bring accountability to the state of Israel and to end the state of apartheid and of Israel and the military occupation in the occupied territories. With me are three impressive and respected activists. The first is Sarah al-Bukhari. Sarah
Hello.
al-Bukhari is a researcher at the Palestinian Voice of Italy. She has a degree in the history of the MENA region from the Orientale di Napoli University. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks to you for inviting me. It's a pleasure telling and sharing the information that we constantly see through the social media, through the news, to the Palestinian Chronicle and to the viewers around the world. Thank you.
Absolutely. The pleasure is ours, Sarah. And we also have Ghazi Elamry. Ghazi is a journalist and a former communications coordinator at UNRWA office in Lebanon. He has a master's degree in international relations at the Catholic University of Milano. Welcome to the show, Ghazi.
Thank you, Mr. Ramzy. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure actually to be part of this show tonight.
Thank you, Ghazi. And last but not least, usually she is my co-host on Palestine Chronicle TV. Today she is a guest on the show because I would really like to ask her a few questions since she is based in Italy and very well versed of the history of Italy, specifically in terms to Italy's official relationship with Palestine and Israel. Romana is an Italian writer and the managing editor of the Palestine Chronicle. She is a widely published journalist, and she has a master's degree in foreign languages and literature and specializes in audio, visual, and journalism translation. Welcome to the show, Romana. I think you are muted, Romana. Now we can hear you.
Thanks for having me, Ramzy.
Of course. So let me first raise this question that could serve by way of creating a foundation for our conversation. How do ordinary Italians, in your view, perceive the situation in Palestine and Israel? And is this perception, be it pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, is it transitioning to something else as a result of the events underway in Palestine? Or is it fixed? Is it static? Let's start with Sarah. What is your take on this, Sarah?
Well, the situation in Italy is regarding the Palestinian and the Israeli issue, the matter. For sure, it is shifting. I'm going to start with this, but we still need to work much, much more. In the past years, like 10 years ago, maybe, and 20 years ago, the voices of Italian movements were much stronger, and they would gather much more people for the Palestinian cause. We must not forget that Italy is facing a very critical moment, economically speaking, due to the COVID crisis. For sure, all of the nations around the world, but in Italy, the situation is very particular. But regarding the Palestinian matter, the people, for sure, in general, are very disturbed by the images, are very surprised of what is happening.
And Sarah, where do they glean these images? Where do they watch it on mainstream television in Italy or other means?
Well, if people who watch it on mainstream media usually have a pro-Israeli perspective, because that is what usually the mainstream media tells us. We can see it from the beginning when they said that some images were a portrait of lies of what is happening in Palestine. Then the activists, of course, responded, and some newspapers started to shift. But at the moment of what is happening in Palestine after the Gaza war, there is not so much talking about it. People are unaware through mainstream media of what is really happening in the situation at the current moment. So they rely on several activists through social media. They rely on independent magazines. But that's of course too little to share on the information of what is happening, because as you're aware, there are thousand things happening at a second, and not only in Jerusalem, in the east part of Jerusalem, but in Akka, in Nablus, in Hebron al-Khalil, in Gaza, in many parts of Palestine. So it is very difficult even for activists to cover it all, but we're trying to spread the word. Italians in general are a very hospitable and welcome and helpful people. So when it comes to ask for help in terms of humanitarian help, they have always helped the others. We can just think of the dockers from the ports of Italy, who were the first that stopped the embargo of weapons to Israel. But after that, the majority doesn't still speak up about what is really happening. Sometimes they view it in a very passive way. There is very little engagement if we have to compare it to other countries in Europe and the rest of the world.
Okay, before we dissect, these are very good and important points. Before we dissect some of these points, let me just move to Ghazi quickly and ask him, as an activist who was present in Italy during this latest Israeli onslaught on Gaza, but also the Palestinian resistance and uprising throughout all of occupied Palestine, how did you position yourself as an activist? And what was the role that you felt that you needed to fulfill to make up for the lacking of coverage that was coming from mainstream media?
Yeah, actually, as a journalist, I think I have the duty to shed light on what's happening in Palestine. When it's just cause, it's your duty to tell the people about what's happening, about the suffering of isolated people who are suffering ethnic cleansing, who are living under apartheid regime, who are under occupation for so many years. And with the very shameful very shameful coverage of the Western mainstream media, particularly here in Italy, the narrative was really shameful. The way they were broadcasting the news to the Italian audience, and the Italian audience, as Sarah said, they are usually passive and neutral, but we can't omit the role of the mainstream media in influencing the public opinion. So when they hear the narrative from an Israeli perspective, unintentionally they'll have some kind of positioning in the Palestinian towards the Palestinian cause and being pro-Israel. So it was our duty to tell the truth, and that's why during this latest incidents, we started what we call now the Palestinian Voice in Italy. It's an Instagram and Facebook platform that aims to cover and counter the narrative that is spread widely within the Italian society.
And if Sarah could just tell us a little bit more about the Palestinian Voice of Italy. It's a new organization, And the aim here is to counter the prejudices and the biases in mainstream media. Do you feel like you have enough interactions? Is it promising, the start of this organization?
For sure, it is promising, and it's a beautiful thing that has happened. There are other, of course, movements that talk about Palestine. Pal Voice Italy was just born. We try to provide everything into Italian language because and translate it almost immediately from Arabic, English, or trying to help through other channels from Hebrew languages and so on. It is very important to share. Yes, it is. It's a good start. I wish there were much more organizations like this, or organizations that could gather together and help each other in solidarity for one cause only, which is the Palestinian cause, and not create disruptive things within the organizations. At this point, the only thing that must be very clear is that we are fighting for the Palestinian cause, and that's the main thing. All the rest that could be speculation or other things can come later into question. But right now, the main thing is to bring up the information, then use in real time to the major audience.
Absolutely. So we have if for the lack of a better term, a war of narratives, and to have a narrative, you have to be clear and unified on the anchors of this narrative, and you have to push content to balance out the deceptive and misleading content that we see penetrating every aspect of mainstream society, not just in Italy, but throughout the West. But I would like to move to Romana and just ask her. And before I ask her, I would like to show this video. Yes, and Sarah, I know that we haven't. We still have a bit of time, so we'll be able to address all these points. But just quickly, I would like to share this video with our readers.
Io sono stato, ripeto, nel Libano e ho visto i contingenti, i cosi, i posti, i cimiteri di Katila e Shab. È una cosa che angoscia vedere questo cimitero dove sono sepolti le vittime di quel massacro orrendo. Il responsabile di quel massacro orrendo è ancora al governo in Israele. È quasi baldanzoso di questo massacro fatto. È un responsabile cui dovrebbe essere dato il bando dalla società. È stato un massacro, mi hanno detto quelli del posto, tremendo. Quante vittime ha fatto. Io sono stato.
So back to our guests here. Romana, tell us a little bit more about this. This is President Sandro Pertini, I believe, speaking in December 1982 about the Israeli massacre in Sabra and Shatila. The language is so elevated, the clarity of the moral position taken by the Italian government in 1982 is a far cry from what is happening today. What has changed since then?
First of all, Sandro Pertini was a partisan, was a freedom fighter. He belonged to that generation of Italian politicians who actually made Italy out of the resistance against Nazism and fascism. So he wasn't afraid of speaking the truth. And as you said, his discourse was so elevated that he actually anticipated the concept of, boycotting when he said that person should be banned from society. And what changed? Trying to retrace Italy's shift, especially regarding the left on Palestine, is painful because somehow it means following the same painful path of emptying of the values that characterized the Italian left and made it great. The Italian left for so long was a point of reference for the Palestinian liberation movement. For example, Enrico Berlinguer, who was one of the leaders of the Communist Party, a very beloved one, and Bettino Craxi, who was a socialist leader, who is also a controversial figure, but regarding the foreign politics and Palestine, he was really solid. They met Yasser Arafat several times, and we have also a picture of Bettino Craxi and Enrico Berlinguer with Yasser Arafat. When Enrico Berlinguer passed away, Yasser Arafat paid tribute to him during an interview, declaring that during the Beirut siege, they were in contact and they talked on the phone several times. So there was a direct contact between the Palestinian liberation movement and the Italian left, because the Palestinian liberation movement does not represent only the struggle against this colonial monster, which is the Zionist settler colonial state and reality, but it also represents a struggle against imperialism and neo-colonialism and colonialism. So that emptying of values was reflected.
Romana, what has changed? Did the relationship between Palestinians and Italians have changed? Between Italy and Israel has changed, or was the change happening within Italian society itself? And this kind of links up to the question by John Mark Guzman asking, does the society of Italy defend Palestinians from religious perspective or political perspective or what else? And also from a general point of view in Italy, why should they bother? They are removed from the conflict. Why should they even have any connection to this struggle in the first place?
What changed, first of all, is the fact that now it's really difficult, especially when it comes to foreign politics, to distinguish between the so-called progressive forces and the far right and populist movements. So basically, there is an equivalence between the two sides. And what changed is, the religious perspective, can be of some help when it comes to a humanitarian side. But in the latest onslaught and in the recent Israeli aggression of Gaza, even the leftist forces, like the Democratic Party, did not talk about the humanitarian side. The discourse was aimed at equating between the suffering of the Palestinian people and the supposed suffering of the Israeli civilians. So that language among politicians was completely cancelled, even the humanitarian side. In fact, we had the Secretary General of the Partito Democratico, of the Democratic Party, Enrico Letta, who went and he shared platform with Salvini and far-right politicians on May 13th, so on the third day of the war.
Let me interrupt you here for a second, Romana, and bring Sarah to the conversation. Just looking at this photo, Italian officials, rallying behind Israel, where Palestinian children and their entire families being wiped out completely. There can be no moral justification for this, but there can be perhaps a political explanation. Why do these officials and politicians feel this strong solidarity with Israel, and they feel like they have to make this point right now?
Well, this solidarity is very common in all Europe through all politicians in Europe. So there is nothing different in Italy when they have to stick maybe on more of a let's call it political, or more of an economical support of what will happen within the Mediterranean area. What we saw was something shocking for everyone, or at least it was for me, because no matter what child it is, you can never support such atrocities that totalitarian regimes to civilians. It was something that brought into mind that actually those politicians, as all politicians of Europe, because I think of them in a major way, do not actually care anymore about any human life. What they care about is standing within the parliament, sitting on wherever they are, and keep talking, because even their speeches have no sense. I don't know who writes to them those speeches, but it's really controversial. I mean, if I can jump back to the media, I was listening on the first day on La Sette, an explanation of what is happening in Palestine, and even though I have information, I was confused. So what they relied on was creating more and more confusion within the people, saying, look, this is a very complicated thing. You will never understand it. And they brought this in, as Romana said, as Ghazi said before, and the politics, of course, helped them. So this is a strategic way that I think all European leaders share and want to advance in. Maybe, I don't know, I'm going to put this in, but I would like to question all European leaders to think about what happened after Second World War. Why didn't they want the Jews, the European Jews, on their land? No country in Europe besides Denmark and Bulgaria wanted their Jews in their land. Some remained, of course, but most of them were advised to go to Palestine. So at the same time, I believe here there is a major economic issue that we are in a part not aware of, even if it's quite clear. And they are playing a very, very dirty game, if I may say so, not to exaggerate with the words.
And let me bring
you allow
you
me,
stay.
Mr. Ramzy. Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment regarding
Of course, Ghazi, yes.
the transformation of the relation between Palestine and Italy throughout the years, because in the past, Italy was considered the Western European country that is most sympathetic to the Palestinian people. However, this support underwent a gradual and consistent shift. In my opinion, because of three main reasons. The first one is the social and political transformation within the Italian society itself. Second, because of the rise of the Israeli power of influence within the Italian society through its propaganda PR machine within Italy and within Europe and the world in general. And third, because of the political and social fragmentation that marginalized the role of the Palestinian community and influence within Italy in the past. Thanks to the work of the Italian grassroots solidarity and Palestinian political activism, the Palestinian cause was prioritized within Italian politics, and the pro-Palestinian position of Italy was clear. But now, with the rise of the right in Italy and the huge influence of Israel, I think this can justify the shift of Italy's position towards the Palestinian cause.
And just remaining on the topic of the media, if one is to look back at the history, Italian history, and the annual celebrations that are that commemorates various anti-liberation struggles, anti-fascist struggle, the references that they make to liberation, to freedom fighting, that sort of thing. I mean, you would think that Italian history is much more, in tune with Palestinian history. I wonder what are the anchors that the Israelis use and the pro-Israeli movement uses in order for them to capture the sympathy and the support of ordinary Italians. For example, here in the United States, they latch on various concepts such as the so-called war on terror or Islamic extremism, and of course the constant manipulation and misuse of the term anti-Semitism. What are the anchors of that discussion that makes the average Italian kind of gravitate towards an Israeli position in Italy, Romana?
More or less the same. Like after 9/11, the Islamophobia spread, and as a result of the American propaganda of the war on terror, it was the same in Italy. That discourse was pushed throughout mainstream media so much that it actually touched every level and every sector of society. So, for example, in the latest aggression, mainstream media never talked about the Palestinian people, but they talked about Hamas, and they referred to Hamas as a fundamentalist, and the Islamic movement. So they try to basically scare people with this, fundamentalist threat, because this is a war on terror. And then, of course, the anti-Semitism. In Italy, it's easy because, of course, do not forget that the fascist regime approved the so-called racial laws. So, of course, the right has to prove that they rebranded their movement completely. Gianfranco Fini in the early 2000s went to Israel to rebrand the far-right movements in Italy and to anchor them into a whole new narrative. Salvini went to Israel and announced, the readiness of the League Party to be part of the Italian government from Gaza, from the crossing between Israel and Gaza. So basically, all these elements are there. And the anti-Semitism discourse is really strong. In fact, there is a proposal for a law, a draft bill, to fight the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions movement, which is at the parliament. It wasn't approved, but it's still there, which tries to connect the racism to anti-Semitism and to the boycott of Israel. So basically, more or less, we have the same, discourse that is applied in the United States is applied in Italy too.
But Sarah, why are Italians buying into this discourse? At least here in the United States, for example, there is a long-rooted history of American support for Israel. In Italy, this is not exactly the same. Who are the Palestinian allies in the Italian government and in the Italian media? Who do you work with?
Well, we work independently. When before the war, the days of the war of Gaza, when there were the Al-Aqsa clashes that the occupied forces stormed in and so on, and we were sending materials to several mainstream media, nobody published it. They started to publishing it when Hamas, the Qasmi Brigade, attacked at Tel Aviv. But that was a consequence of a month, or let's call it 73 years, but let's think about the recent event of a month of disturbing of what was happening, not just in East Jerusalem, but all across Palestinian cities where Palestinians live. I wanted to add regarding anti-Semitism, I think this was one of the main things, besides other investments that Israel did and so on in Italy. But anti-Semitism played a major role in Italy in particular. What is really funny about this term, and the thing that they want to make it a law, not only in Italy, but yesterday they did it in Switzerland, they announced it, and but in all Europe, is that this term will not include all Semites. It will only include Jews. So is this law going to be racist against Arabs, Armenian, and other people who belong to the Semite family? Okay, it's true that a lot of Arabs are Muslims, but a lot of Arabs and Palestinians are also Christians. What about them? How it's not just Islamophobia, it's anti-Semitism for all people that belong to the Semite community, to the Semite family. Now, we know that this term was coined in Europe, and it has a reflection majorly on the Jewish history and the Jewish Holocaust that happened in Europe. But regarding today, things must shift. Europe cannot rely on things that has done and has guilt that has done and allowed it to be done 70 years ago. It has relied on a new perspective on other Semit communities that live on this land. So it's actually, if this law passes on, it's a very racist law in regard to other Semit families, Semit members of the family.
Right.
Sorry.
And of course, this is a global battle because we see similar laws that are being passed throughout Western governments and parliaments, and even at a state and city and small community levels. If I may bring Ghazi to this conversation. So right now we have a global movement for Palestine worldwide, and this movement is, although is decentralized, tries to push for a unified Palestinian perspective. If you may tell us just a little bit about the pro-Palestine movement in Italy, does it work with European and global pro-Palestine movements throughout the world? And in what capacity do you coordinate, and how do you measure your success?
Yeah, actually, let's start talking about us at the Palestinian Voice in Italy. Like, we believe in the importance of empowering young people to become agents of change. We need to benefit from the energy of youth, because while still small, this youthful activism displays a determination, clear-headedness, and independence that could be very helpful to the future of solidarity with the Palestinian and for Palestine and the Palestinian people. And yes, we have coordination with the solidarity movements all over the world. We coordinate with directly with the solidarity movements in, for example, in Norway and the UK. Personally, I participated in the campaign Football Against Apartheid, which puts anti-apartheid football fans in touch with others, establish new groups at every football club worldwide. And like Football Against Apartheid groups are now established at the Premier League clubs like Tottenham Hotspurs, Arsenal, Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea, and Liverpool. And also it's very active in Norway with teams like Vålerenga, Lillestrøm, and others. We tried actually here in Italy. In Italy, a little bit difficult because the government is very strict in that sense. Like in 2017, we tried to demonstrate in front of the stadium in Reggio Emilia when Italy hosted Israel in a World Cup qualification match, and then me and some other activists, we were arrested actually, and we were harassed by the Italian police and also with the Mossad agents who were present there to provide the security for the Israeli team. We were standing peacefully, just like distributing flyers and holding banners and flags, and even that was bothering them because they know that raising awareness and exposing Israel to the public is dangerous for the Israeli propaganda, which has been working on for so many years to influence the public opinion in Europe and in the world.
And we know the issue of sports in particular is relevant to this conversation because of how effective it was during the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. Some people and historians, in fact, argue that while academic boycotts and other kinds of boycotts may have registered and started a conversation between various universities and academic groups and so forth, it wasn't until the sports boycott took hold in South Africa that the conversation was elevated and reached every aspect of society in that country and got the attention of ordinary people. Now, Italy, there was this very disappointing piece of news where Francesco Totti, the legendary player of AS Roma, was actually in Israel just a couple of days after the war has ended, while Palestinians are still trying to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones from under the wreckage. You had Italian players like Totti going to entertain Israeli audiences. Of course, many people found that not only offensive and morally wrong, but also distasteful as well. How do people like Totti and others can be held accountable? And who is and what has been done regarding such an issue, Sarah and Ghazi?
Well, let me start that I was a big fan of Totti. I remember when I was 12, 13, I would, even if I was not a fan of Roma, I would watch how he played, because I mean, as a footballer, he's a monster, and it's spectacular to watch him playing. And we know, we are aware that Francesco Totti during the years have helped a lot of campaigns, a lot of NGOs. It seemed that, you know, he was a very supportive person. But now, of course, everything is put into question. What kind of person he is? What does he really believe in? What does he? Whatever he engages, is it true, or is it because he needs publicity or other things? Even though for a person as Totti, I don't think he needs a much more publicity than he already has. Has he been held accountable? Only by Palestinian groups and movements. Not, I can't recall of any other magazines or other members of any politics. I mean, we have discussed before how our politics run, so you cannot expect that he has been held accountable until now. But it shows you how a person is. So it's not important. We try always to think about people on what they have achieved in their lives, in general speaking, and we praise them for that. Actually, what we should think about is what is behind them, what is their character, what do they stand for, to really understand if that person is worth trusting, is worth listening to, is worth spending time with. So I don't know. I'm not aware if he has been held accountable through other mainstream media or through politics. But
Perhaps Ghazi can help us shed more light on this issue. I remember when Lionel Messi came along with Suarez and the respective teams to play in Palestine, in Israel. There was an international uproar. The Palestine, the Palestine FIFA branch, and many other FIFA branches around the Arab world raised their voices in protest. It seems that Italian footballers do not have much accountability, if you will, when it comes to these issues. Is it because of the lack of coordination on our part, or for any other reason, Ghazi?
Yeah, actually, I think the pro-Palestinian activism in Italy these days are not in the best position to put pressure on Francesco Totti or other public figures, not even the politicians or the Italian government. As I mentioned earlier, the Israeli influence in Italy is strong, is huge, and Palestinians now I think we are finding the way to go back to where we were in terms of activism and solidarity work with the Palestinians. I think what Totti did is shameful, is unacceptable by a player in his size, in his profile, and at least like he was condemned publicly by all the pro-Palestinian activists, but not only by the pro-Palestinian activists, but also by all the believers in human rights and justice, because the Palestinian cause, it's an international cause of justice and human rights, and Totti must be ashamed of what he did by going to Israel just a couple of days after the end of the aggression on Gaza.
Absolutely. Yes, Romana.
Just to add that there is a campaign to at least hold him accountable and remove him from the list of UNICEF ambassadors. Francesco Totti's position is even more shameful because he is a UNICEF ambassador. He traveled across the world saying that he was defending children. So it is too good to defend children when you are in a comfortable position, but then you go to Israel to watch your match with a beer of your sponsor Heineken in Tel Aviv. The match was disputed in Portugal, so he had zero excuses, and now he's not defending Palestinian children who were slaughtered by Israel. So there is a campaign, and I will put the link, launched by Invicta Palestina, which is one of the social media groups, to remove Francesco Totti from the list of UNICEF ambassadors.
Absolutely, and I personally agree in the sense that we call on activists, civil society organizations, celebrities, footballers to take a moral position on this issue. But if they deliberately fail to do so, they must be held accountable, and there has got to be a price to be paid. Otherwise, why should they feel that they need to leave their comfort zone and take that moral stance? Thank you for sharing the link, Romana. Let me just finish. Let's try to finish at an upbeat and a positive tone here. If each one of you just spend, say, a few seconds, up to a minute, just telling us just a suggestion, a vision, an idea of what needs to be done in order for the Palestinian voice that is communicated by this wonderful youth that we are talking to, is communicated in a very resounding way that becomes truly effective and eventually makes all the difference in Italy. What needs to be done, whether at an organizational level, at a political level, at a media level? Let's start with you, Sarah.
Well, many things can be done in Italy, especially because we're still behind the international community of what has done. Today, I read the news very beautifully that the Neapolitan activists in Napoli sieged and blocked and took the offices of one of the Israeli the Zim company. So they took over it. So we can have actions like this, as Pal Action did across the UK. We can have actions by allowing people to know more about it and write to their to members of the parliament of what is happening, holding them accountable, because many of these members of the parliament, maybe they get some sponsors also out of several companies that directly or indirectly support this Zionist regime. In Italy, we still have a lot to go through. The situation, I should remember, the situation in Italy, it's not very, very positive regarding economic matters. So people get distracted about what they should do for Palestine as they are trying to save their economic day, because the pressure in Italy has been very strong. But at the same time, also to get simply informed and to know more, to have a more critical thinking, to not buy everything that the mainstream media does, but even some what I told you before, and I was very this morning, I kept on scrolling the social media, and I kept seeing people praising the Canadian Prime Minister and praising what has been done in Berlin. Now, regarding the Canadian Prime Minister, it's his duty to condemn Islamophobia. It's something extraordinary that he has done. So yes, in Italy, we still have to come to that point for sure, that some politicians condemn Islamophobia and saying that it's real. But at the same time, we have to think this is normal. What you shouldn't have done is thank the Zionist new leaders and congratulate them at what they have done. The second thing is a lot of people, even in Italy, were saying, "Oh, it's a good thing that what has been done in Berlin regarding the creation of this building with all three faiths in one. It's extraordinary, but it's nothing new. Let's remember that within the Islamic empire for how many centuries, these things were normality. What would be interesting to see is that these governments condemn the Zionist movement and bring peace to the only capital that holds all these three major faiths, and not by praising. For sure, it's beautiful and it's amazing and it's a start, but it's not. It's nothing. It doesn't mean nothing to say, "Oh, we are in peace with Islam or Christianity or Judaism."
It doesn't
Let's
translate
not
to
the
anything
capital.
tangible on the ground. Real
Yeah.
moral courage is to speak truth to power and to address issues of injustice that are happening against innocent, oppressed, occupied people in Palestine. Thank you for that, Sarah. Ghazi,
I think our role is to attempt to provide a counter narrative based on the history and to have a goal which is to share the reality, exposing Israel as a settler colonial project based on oppression, apartheid, systematic ethnic cleansing, and disposition of Palestinians as a whole. We need to provide real-time news for what's happening in Palestine, shedding light on the violations and atrocities committed by the apartheid state. And with the availability of first-hand accounts on social media, it's becoming harder for the Israeli Ministry of Strategy at first to spin the facts and for the mainstream media in Italy and the world to mirror the Israeli rhetoric. More and more now, the power is shifting to the hands of the public, and news outlets can no longer ignore that, even when it comes to Israel, I think. So it's important to work on the narrative, to try to change the public opinion about the Palestinian cause and try just to expose the facts as it is, because the right is clear and the wrong is clear, and people can just understand it. And from my own experience, I think that when people get education about the Palestinian cause, even in neutral way or from neutral sources, when they understand what is the situation in the ground, their position would be automatically pro-Palestine, because things on the ground are clear. There's occupation, there's ethnic cleansing, apartheid regime, there's people under oppression, and everything is clear. So we just need to expose this information to the people and to let them see that Israel without its mask that has been taken for so many years.
absolutely. And the Palestinian voice of it in Italy is clearly one of these very critical initiatives, a platform that can, in fact, balance out the biases in the media and provides greater room and space for the Palestinian voice. I want Romana to say something very quickly, but I can tell that Sarah is trying to say something as well. So, Sarah, go ahead, and before we finish with
Yeah.
Romana.
Well, what I would just wanted to add, I get many times questions of people who still haven't taken any side, and they tell me, "I have a different opinion than yours." And so I try sometimes to explain, but then I actually get neither angry but very shocked about it, because you cannot not have an opinion as about what is happening. I mean, if you see apartheid, you must condemn it, no matter who is doing it, because it's something. So this is something that maybe we still have to work on, even if it's shocking that a certain amount of people, even of people I know, keep on asking me this question. Now, the only answer would be, maybe you should try it in first place to understand what apartheid is, which is a very horrible answer to give, of course, but you cannot justify. There is no justification on this matter. That's it.
Absolutely, and it is time. It is time to have this kind of forceful language, as opposed to negotiate small spaces for the Palestinian voice. The Palestinian voice has to be very clear and decisive regarding this issue, the same way that Palestinians in Palestine have a very clear and decisive take on the resistance and their vision for liberation. Romana?
Yes, I would like to say that as a media professional, as a journalist, I am aware of the fact that groups like Palestinian Voice in Italy are essential, are critical, are vital, because we are in desperate need for a counter narrative. And I dare to say that we are in desperate need for a counter narrative and for a new language, even in the pro-Palestine field. As an Italian, I never judge the Palestinian forms of resistance. I do not divide Palestinians into good Palestinians and bad Palestinians. I do not judge the forms in which the resistance is deployed. I try not to replace Palestinians with my voice, but rather to spread the voice of Palestinians, which is already there and it's well articulated. So I would like to tell Italian people that, we do not have to replace Palestinians in their struggle for freedom. We need to convey their message, which is a totally different thing. And there is a desperate need for information in Italian language, because the English language is not so popular and common among the Italian people. So really translating the news is so essential. That's why I say that their job is so critical and so vital, because really we need that to create a counter narrative, even in Italy, to completely dismantle the Zionist narrative that now seems like common sense and neutrality. They say I am neutral, but they're not neutral. They're actually pushing an agenda. So we need to counter that agenda with the same tools they use. And as Gramsci said, with, cultural hegemony. So trying to speak whenever we can and wherever we can.
Fantastic. Beautifully said, Romana. Just very, very quickly, how can people follow the Palestinian Voice in Italy? How do they get their information?
We are mainly based on Instagram, so Pal Voice Italy. Yes, and on Facebook as well, if I'm not wrong. Right, Ghazi?
That's correct. The Palestinian Voice in Italy on Facebook.
And of course, we will be sharing these links with our readers later on once we post this video on our website. I would like to thank all three of you so very much for all the fantastic efforts that you are leading. And hopefully next time we meet and converse, there will be some more good news to celebrate, aside from the fact that the Palestinian Voice and the Palestinian youth of Italy are rising, but also we would like to talk about the widening of that solidarity to every aspect of Italian society. Thank you very much for taking the time, Sarah, Ghazi, and Romana. Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.